Graham Ellis stood silently behind the one-way mirror in his office. A place that once offered him pride now pulsed with a quiet dread. His gaze followed Sarah, one of the most promising bartenders he'd hired this month, as she packed up her station, her face blank, but her movements laced with fatigue and resignation. 3 weeks. That's all she lasted. And that, oddly enough, made her one of the longer survivors. She moved like she belonged in a high-end cocktail lounge, fluid, precise, charismatic. The way she could spin 5 drink orders while keeping a crowded bar laughing was an art form, something rare, something valuable. Graham let out a tired sigh and ran a hand through his graying hair. "That's the 7th one this month," he muttered to himself. The Riverside Tavern, the restaurant he'd poured 15 years of sweat and soul into, had become something else, something he barely recognized. What used to feel like a bustling hub of energy and laughter now resembled a revolving door of broken spirits. The numbers painted the picture in stark, unforgiving strokes, a 300% turnover rate in just half a year. It was like his staff were ghosts, arriving hopeful, then vanishing without a trace. But it wasn't the money. He paid well, above the industry average. His working conditions were clean, manageable. Customers were generally kind. On paper, Riverside was still a dream job. And yet, they kept leaving. He'd tried everything: raises, flexible scheduling, upgraded the break room with a new sound system, even added health benefits. But each time someone quit, their reasons felt rehearsed. Closer to home, pursuing a different path, family emergency, all technically valid, but their eyes always told a different story. A flash of bitterness, a clenched jaw, something left unsaid. Then came the final blow. A Friday night rush, the kind that usually brought in thousands. His head server Marcus, the backbone of the front-of-house team, dropped his apron on the bar and walked out mid-shift. No explanation, no warning, just gone. Graham had to step in himself, fumbling through orders, apologizing to customers who once knew him only as the face behind the brand, not the one taking drink tickets. That night, lying awake in bed with a sting of embarrassment and confusion gnawing at him, he made a decision. He had to see it with his own eyes. A week later, Graham Ellis vanished. In his place came Greg Evans, a middle-aged man with calloused hands, dark-dyed hair, and a patchy beard. A man with nothing to lose. Graham spent nights rehearsing Greg's voice, his posture, even the way he'd nervously wring his hands. When he looked in the mirror, he barely recognized himself, and that was the point. On a crisp Tuesday morning, Greg Evans entered through the back employee door of the Riverside Tavern, heart racing like he was doing something illegal. Clive Harmon, the general manager Graham had trusted implicitly for 2 years, barely looked up from his clipboard. With the cold efficiency of a man numb to turnover, Clive shoved a stained apron into Greg's hands and rattled off his duties without a second glance. "Start with the grunt work," he said, voice as dry as old wood. "Clean the glassware, stock the shelves, mop the floors, keep your head down, do what you're told. Maybe you'll earn more later." Greg nodded, grateful. Not because of the job, but because the curtain was finally lifting. In the days that followed, Graham reacquainted himself with the grind. His body ached in ways it hadn't in decades. 8 hours on your feet, soaked in sweat and beer residue, all for a few bucks and a pat on the back. But it was more than physical. What struck him hardest was the silence. This place used to buzz with laughter, banter, shared complaints about rude customers and kitchen mishaps. Now it felt like a prison cafeteria. Everyone watched their words, glancing over their shoulders, shrinking when Clive entered the room. The turning point came on his 4th day. He was sweeping the dining room during the pre-shift meeting when he overheard something that froze his blood. Clive sat with 2 new hires, Jessica, fresh-faced and eager after graduating college, and David, a transplant from another state hoping to find stability. Graham leaned closer, pretending to scrub a stubborn mark on the floor. About tips, Clive began, tone casual like he was talking about the weather. You might be used to different rules, but here at Riverside, we do things differently. Jessica tilted her head. Different how? Clive smiled. A cold, practiced thing. Tips don't belong to you. They belong to the house. Graham's heart dropped like a stone. What? That was never his policy. David raised a hand, brows furrowed. I'm sorry. Can you explain? I've never worked anywhere. This isn't a democracy, Clive snapped, the smile vanishing. We pool all tips. Everyone gets a fair cut, no matter the shift or section. That's how we do things here. From the corner of his eye, Graham saw Lisa and Tom, two of his longest-standing employees, exchange a fleeting look. Not surprise, not outrage, just defeat. Lisa scrubbed a glass a little too hard. Tom clenched his jaw, his hands suddenly robotic as he organized the bar. That was it. In that moment, Graham saw the whole puzzle. How Clive had rewritten the culture while he wasn't looking. How fear had replaced friendship. How hard-earned money was siphoned away under the guise of fairness, slowly bleeding morale from the veins of his staff. He had finally found the rot in the foundation of his empire. But what he would do next, that would determine whether Riverside Tavern survived or crumbled completely. They knew. That much was clear. Lisa, Tom, and likely others had all figured it out. They knew what was happening with the tips, how they were being collected, rerouted, hidden under the guise of policy. And they weren't okay with it. But they weren't saying a word either. It was the silence of survival, not ignorance. They had learned to keep their heads down, to swallow their frustration, to endure. Clive turned back to Jessica and David, the two newest recruits, and asked, "Any questions?" His voice wasn't curious. It was a warning. Jessica and David both shook their heads, but their faces betrayed them. Confusion, uncertainty, and something like betrayal flashed across their eyes. They were young, probably needed the money, and were terrified of losing their shot on the very first day. But the seed had been planted, and Graham could see it germinating behind their hesitant expressions. "Good," Clive said with finality, rising from his chair. "Remember, what's good for the house is good for everyone. We're all team players here." As the team scattered to their stations, preparing for the lunch rush, Graham moved through the motions like a ghost in his own life. The words haunted him. Tips belong to the house. He wiped down a counter for the 5th time, not because it needed cleaning, but because he couldn't stop replaying it in his mind. 15 years in this business, and never had he imposed something so fundamentally unethical. Tips were sacred. They were a direct expression of gratitude from customer to server, a reward for excellence, a symbol of trust. What Clive had created wasn't a system, it was a scam, and Graham had let it happen under his nose. The betrayal cut deeper than he expected. He had trusted Clive, promoted him, empowered him to lead. But this was theft. Worse than that, it was betrayal disguised as leadership, hidden beneath motivational slogans and fake smiles. Graham's thoughts were interrupted when the doors opened and customers began to trickle in. And now, with new eyes, he saw it all. Lisa took a table of well-dressed businessmen, charming them with practiced ease. She delivered excellent service, made thoughtful recommendations, and walked away from the table with a thick tip envelope. At least $40 on a $200 bill, but she didn't pocket it. Clive was there before she could even turn around, scooping up the bill and slipping it into a locked cash box like it was routine. Like it was his. Tom, behind the bar, crafted elaborate cocktails for a birthday group, entertaining them with his wit and flair. They handed over a $50 tip, all smiles. But just like before, Clive was the one to collect. Graham watched as Tom's shoulders slumped slightly after each transaction. It wasn't dramatic, just a quiet surrender. A man beaten down by a system designed to siphon hope in increments. The cumulative toll was written in their posture, in their silence. They had stopped expecting justice. By the end of the night, Graham tallied a rough estimate, nearly $800 in tips. Every dollar flowed straight into Clive's hands, into that box, into a system that offered no transparency, no fairness, and no proof that the money was going anywhere but Clive's pocket. "Good night, Greg," Clive called out as Graham finished mopping the last stretch of floor. "Same time tomorrow," Graham replied, masking his fury with a practiced nod. But inside, something had shifted. He wasn't just angry now. He was resolute. He had seen enough to know the staff wasn't the problem. They weren't lazy. They weren't entitled or disloyal. They were being methodically stripped of their dignity by a man Graham had handpicked. But now he knew. And knowledge was a dangerous thing in the hands of a man who'd built something from the ground up. The next morning, Graham came armed, not with confrontation but curiosity. The kind that disarmed. The kind that coaxed the truth out of even the most guarded liars. Clive was behind the bar, reviewing inventory. Graham approached with careful hesitation, a slight slump in his shoulders, the mask of Greg Evans firmly in place. "Mr. Harmon," he said gently, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about the tips belonging to the house." Clive looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly, calculating. "What about it?" "Well," Graham continued, scratching his head like a nervous rookie, "I've worked at a few places before, and I've never really seen it done that way. I was just wondering how it all works." There was a beat of silence. Then Clive smiled. It was the kind of smile Graham had grown to hate, the fake, patronizing grin of a man who thought he held all the cards. "I'm glad you asked, Greg. Shows you're thinking about the big picture." Clive set down his clipboard, leaned against the bar, and adopted a tone Graham recognized instantly: salesman mode. "Most restaurants are stuck in the past, everyone out for themselves, servers fighting for good tables, bartenders hoarding tips, kitchen staff getting left behind. That creates a toxic environment. So here, we do it better. All tips go into the employee fund." He spread his arms as if unveiling a miracle. "It's used for staff parties, bonuses, and emergency relief. Keeps things fair, builds unity. Nobody's left behind." Graham nodded, feigning admiration. "That sounds incredible. So there are actual bonuses?" "Of course," Clive beamed. "Quarterly, based on the restaurant's performance. And the parties? Oh man, we've had some legendary ones, all covered by the fund." "And the emergency support?" Graham pushed gently. "That must be a real lifeline." "Absolutely. We look after our own here." But over the next several days, Graham saw the truth. There were no bonuses, no parties, no signs of emergency aid being distributed. What he found instead were broken promises sealed inside a locked cash box and staff who had given up on asking questions. And now, Graham Ellis, once a silent observer, was ready to act. The descent into this darkness had ended. The climb back up was about to begin. There were no bonuses, no celebrations, no team outings, not even a basic pizza night. When Graham casually asked Lisa about the last staff party, she laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Staff party," she said, eyes tired and voice edged with bitterness. "I've been here 8 months and haven't even seen so much as a free slice of pizza." It stung, but nothing could have prepared Graham for what he saw that Thursday night. Dinner service had slowed, a brief pause in the chaos. Graham was restocking glassware when he overheard Maria Santos, a hardworking single mom and one of the most consistent, cheerful servers on staff, approach Clive. Her voice was quiet, cracking under the strain of holding back tears. "Mr. Harmon, I'm really sorry to bother you, but I'm in a tough spot. My landlord's threatening eviction, and I'm just $200 short on rent. I was wondering if there was any way I could get an advance from the employee fund, just until payday." Graham stopped what he was doing. Maria's face, usually so composed, so dignified, was pale, her eyes filled with quiet desperation. He'd seen her work herself raw, taking on double shifts, always showing up early, staying late, never once complaining. She was the heart of the restaurant in so many ways. And yet Clive didn't even blink. "Maria," he said coolly, "the employee fund isn't a personal bank account. It's for legitimate emergencies that affect the entire team." "But you said it was for staff emergencies," she replied, voice trembling. "I said emergencies that serve the restaurant's interests," Clive corrected, his tone hardening. "Your rent issues are personal. I suggest you find another solution. Maybe pick up extra shifts." Maria flinched like she'd been slapped. "I'm already working 6 days a week. I haven't had a day off in 3. "Then perhaps you need to reconsider your budgeting skills," he snapped, already turning back to his paperwork. Graham stood frozen, rage bubbling under his skin as he watched Maria retreat, her shoulders hunched, her dignity crumbling with every step. She wiped her face with the back of her hand when she thought no one was looking. Later that night, Graham stayed behind to finish the cleaning. Maria lingered as well, tending her last table in silence. As she returned to the register, Graham gently approached her with a clean rag. "Everything okay?" he asked softly. Maria looked up, startled. She forced a smile. "Oh, just tired. Long day." But Graham saw through it. "If you don't mind me saying," he continued, "you look like you're carrying the weight of the world. Sometimes it helps to talk." Her mask cracked. The words tumbled out like she'd been holding them back for months. "I work so hard," she whispered. "I give everything to this place. I smile when they're rude. I serve tables with aching feet and an empty stomach, and I still can't keep a roof over my daughter's head." Graham's throat tightened. "What about the employee fund? I thought Clive said—" Maria laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. "The fund's a joke, Greg. In 8 months, I haven't seen a cent. No bonuses, no help, nothing. All those tips, they disappear. Every night, Clive collects them for this so-called fund. But when someone really needs help—" She shook her head, her voice heavy with betrayal. "There's always a reason why we don't qualify." The next day, Maria didn't show up for her shift. Graham wasn't surprised, but it still gutted him. Clive didn't seem to care. He scratched her name off the roster like she'd never mattered, muttering something about unreliable staff. But Graham knew the truth. Maria hadn't quit because she lacked dedication. She quit because she couldn't afford to work for someone who treated her as expendable. That night, as Graham watched Clive casually pocket another full day's worth of tip money, he made a vow. This was no longer about understanding why his staff kept leaving. This was about justice. For Maria, for Lisa, for Tom, and for every other soul who had been quietly robbed under his roof. Graham knew Clive was stealing, but now he needed proof. A break came the following Friday. Over the past weeks, Graham had begun to notice a pattern. Every Friday, like clockwork, Clive would retreat into his office after closing, emerging 20 to 30 minutes later with a thick manila envelope under his arm, and a new urgency in his step. That night, Graham volunteered to stay late again, this time under the pretense of deep cleaning the storage room. He positioned himself behind a stack of boxes near the office, just out of sight. At exactly 11:47 p.m., Clive locked the front door. By midnight, he was inside his office, the sound of shuffling bills and the snap of the cash box loud in the silence. At 12:23, he emerged, envelope in hand, glancing around like a man sneaking out of a crime scene. Graham followed at a distance, crouching behind a delivery truck in the dim parking lot. Clive slid into a sleek, silver BMW, an odd choice for someone supposedly living on a manager's salary. Graham's beat-up Honda was parked just far enough to avoid suspicion. He tailed Clive through the city, tension coiling with every turn. This wasn't a casual drive. Clive stayed in the wealthier part of town, eventually pulling into valet parking at a place that made Graham's jaw tighten. The Velvet Crown, a glittering high-end establishment that screamed excess, crystal chandeliers, gold trim, valet attendants in tuxedos. Clive handed over his keys with the ease of a regular. The doorman greeted him warmly. "Mr. Harmon, they're expecting you in the back office." Expecting him? Graham's pulse quickened. This wasn't dinner. This was a deal, a transaction. He waited in his car for nearly 2 hours, watching patrons come and go, local politicians, well-known business leaders, and couples celebrating anniversaries. Finally, just before 2 a.m., Clive reappeared. The envelope was gone, and he walked like a man who had just made a very profitable deposit. The next week, Graham took a different approach. He booked a reservation. No more Greg Evans. Tonight, he was Graham Ellis again, dressed in a tailored suit and determined to walk through the front doors of the Velvet Crown. Everything about the place screamed luxury. The kind of wealth built on exploitation, perhaps. He sat at the bar, ordered a top-shelf whiskey, and engaged the bartender in small talk. "First time here?" the bartender asked with a polished smile. Graham sipped the drink and nodded. "Yeah, friend of mine recommended it." He didn't say who. He didn't have to, because now the trap was set, and he was about to find out just how deep this rabbit hole went. "So, you know Clive Harmon?" the bartender asked, his face brightening with recognition. Graham gave a casual nod. "He said he comes here often." "Yeah," the bartender chuckled, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "He's basically family around here. Every Friday night like clockwork. Been coming for over a year." Graham's stomach twisted. His mind started racing as puzzle pieces clicked into place faster than he could process them. Every Friday, for over a year. "He must be doing really well for himself," Graham said, keeping his voice neutral, pretending to sip his whiskey. "Oh, big time," the bartender replied, leaning in a bit closer. "Guy's got some serious investments going. Smart dude, knows how to make his money move." Then came the revelation that turned Graham's blood cold. "Between you and me," the bartender said, glancing around, "he's been bringing in a steady flow of capital to invest in this place. Cash only. Word is he's even earned a piece of ownership." Graham froze. Ownership? Cash investments? Clive was stealing tips from his restaurant, from his employees, and funneling them into a rival business? A luxurious competitor at that. Every dollar that should have gone to a tired waitress buying groceries or a single dad covering rent was now fueling Clive's equity stake in a marble-clad palace of indulgence. The betrayal stung worse than anything Graham had felt in years. Clive wasn't just skimming from the top, he was siphoning the lifeblood from Graham's dream, bleeding his staff dry to buy his way into elite circles. Graham forced a smile, though it felt like glass shattering in his throat. Must be nice. That kind of disposable income from a restaurant manager's salary. The bartender laughed, completely unaware of the emotional war erupting behind Graham's eyes. "Right. I mean, good for him, yeah? Making moves. That's the dream, isn't it?" No, Graham thought. That's not the dream. That's a nightmare built on the backs of the exhausted, the voiceless, the hopeful. His phone buzzed as he stepped into the cool night air. A message from his assistant back at the Riverside. 3 more employees had quit. Jessica from training, and 2 kitchen staff, all in one day. Graham stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, his fists clenched at his sides as he read the names. Not another wave. Not more casualties of a system rigged against the people it was supposed to serve. And as he looked back at the glittering front of the Velvet Crown, its windows glowing like a temple of privilege, he felt a dark, focused rage begin to rise in his chest. This wasn't about one man anymore. This was about all of it. Clive wasn't just stealing. He was gutting the soul of the Riverside Tavern, one lie at a time. But Graham now had direction, and the next step was clear. He needed proof. The opportunity came sooner than expected. On a slow Tuesday afternoon, Graham overheard 2 servers chatting during their prep. One mentioned she was heading to the Velvet Crown for her anniversary brunch. Apparently, it was the kind of place you splurged for when you wanted to feel rich for a day. Graham's interest peaked instantly. He slid into the conversation with practiced ease. "I've heard good things. Friend of mine says it's incredible. Maybe I should check it out sometime." "You totally should," the server smiled. "Just be ready for sticker shock." That Sunday, Graham returned, but this time, he wasn't Graham Ellis. He came as Greg Evans, worn jeans, faded flannel, scuffed boots. The kind of man who might have saved for weeks just to afford a meal here. Someone who didn't belong. The hostess looked him over with a slight frown, but seated him anyway, at a cramped table near the kitchen doors. Perfect. It gave him a full view of the bar and a direct line to the back hallway where the office was located. He ordered the cheapest brunch item, sipped his coffee slowly, and waited. His patience paid off. Mid-shift, the same bartender from earlier spotted him. "Hey, I remember you," he said with a friendly grin. "Asked about Mr. Harmon last week, right?" Graham nodded. Yeah, I can see why he likes this place." The bartender leaned in again, like he was sharing a fun secret. "Guy's got the best side hustle I've ever seen." Graham's pulse jumped. "Oh yeah? Totally. He manages another spot. What's it called? Riverside something? Anyway, he figured out how to skim tip money over there and pour it into investments here. Been doing it over a year." Skim. That word hit Graham like a slap. Skim. Like, how does that work? Well, you know how restaurants usually let servers keep their tips, right? "This guy convinced his boss," he air-quoted, "to let him pool all the tips for team building or some corporate garbage. But there's no team building. He's just building his bank account." Graham felt like the floor was shifting beneath him. That's when the bartender dropped the final bomb. "Technically, it's legal. He got management sign-off. The staff thinks it's just bad policy, but the guy walks out with stacks of cash every week. No one's the wiser." Graham's heart skipped. Management sign-off. He had never approved such a policy, which meant either Clive forged documentation or someone else had approved it, someone who thought they were the owner, someone Clive lied to, or worse, someone Clive was working with. The bartender leaned on the counter, still talking, completely unaware of the storm building in front of him. "Turnover actually helps him. New employees don't know what a good night's tips should look like, so they don't ask questions. They just work, burn out, and leave." "And how much has he invested?" Graham asked, voice like gravel. "Word is he's got about $40,000 in equity already. And he's still bringing in over $20,000 a month in new cash. Crazy, right?" Graham nodded slowly, doing the math. That was more than a year's worth of tip money, stolen right from under his nose. He finished his coffee, left a tip out of habit, and walked to his car with hands shaking. In the silence of the driver's seat, he opened his phone, hit record, and began documenting everything. Every word, every number, every implication. But one thought chilled him to the core. If Clive had forged his approval, that was one thing. But if someone else thought they were the real owner, someone Clive had tricked into believing he had the authority to redirect those funds, then this wasn't just about Clive. This was bigger. This was organized. And Graham Ellis had just walked into something far deeper and far more dangerous than he ever imagined. It wasn't just theft anymore. As Graham sat alone in his car, staring at the velvet crown from across the street, the pieces finally snapped into horrifying focus. This wasn't just about Clive pocketing tips. This could be a conspiracy, a calculated effort involving the ownership of the velvet crown itself, siphoning money from his staff to fund the rise of a competitor. Whether Clive acted alone or as part of a larger plan, it didn't matter. What mattered was this. Good people were being exploited, and every second Graham waited, more money vanished and more lives were impacted. It was time to shift gears, from investigator to avenger. Graham spent the next week meticulously planning his final move. No more watching, no more speculating. He needed hard, irrefutable evidence, the kind that couldn't be denied in court. The kind that would rip Clive's lies apart in front of the very people he'd been stealing from. The perfect opportunity came through someone Graham knew he could trust, Tom. Tom, the quiet veteran bartender who had stood the test of time. the man who had seen it all and survived longer than anyone but Graham himself. During a lull between rushes, Graham approached him. "Tom, can I ask you something? Off the record." Tom hesitated. Then, slowly, he nodded. "I've been here a few weeks now, and something's not right. The tip thing. What's really going on?" For a brief moment, the years of professionalism slipped from Tom's face, revealing something raw. Anger, exhaustion, quiet defeat. "You want the truth?" he said bitterly. "We're being robbed, all of us, every single night, and we can't say a word. How bad is it? I used to take home $200, sometimes $300 a night. Now I'm lucky if I see 50. They call it the employee fund, but it's just a black hole. No one sees a dime come out of it." Graham leaned in closer. "What if we could prove it? What if I told you, I have a way to stop this? For good?" Tom's eyes sharpened. "What kind of way?" "The kind that ends it permanently. I've got connections, but I need proof." Real proof. Within 2 days, the plan was set. Tom used his local ties to schedule a private event. The Morrison Group's $50 million deal celebration, a perfect storm of cash tips and champagne-soaked egos. And most importantly, it was set for Friday night. Clive's favorite time to strike. "They'll tip like crazy," Tom said. "All cash. These guys are old school." Graham worked around the clock installing covert cameras. Tiny devices hidden in mop buckets, air vents, cleaning supply bins. They would capture every angle of Clive's final heist. The briefcase, the count, the getaway. Friday came. The Morrison Group arrived in force. 12 executives dressed like royalty, ordering the most expensive liquor, treating the staff like VIPs. Graham watched it all unfold as he stocked bottles behind the bar. $100 bills flowed freely. Servers were overwhelmed, but smiling. For a few hours, the restaurant felt alive again. By night's end, the tip pool sat around $3,000, the largest single-night haul Graham had ever seen undercover. Clive moved like clockwork. After the last customer left, he began collecting every bill, every receipt. But this time, he didn't use the usual envelope. He brought a briefcase, sleek, black, lockable. His movements were surgical, confident, deliberate. At 12:47 a.m., he stepped out of his office, briefcase in hand. Graham, hidden behind boxes in the storage room, filmed the entire moment on his phone, just in case. But then Clive froze. "Greg, you still here?" Graham's pulse spiked. If Clive came any closer, "Yeah, Mr. Harmon," Graham called out, keeping his tone light. "Just wrapping up inventory. Wanted to double-check my numbers." A pause, long, tense. "Well, lock up when you're done, and next time, do inventory on your shift." "Yes, sir." Graham didn't move until he heard the engine of Clive's BMW fade into the night. Then, he exhaled, shaking, but victorious. He had it. Now came the final act. He followed Clive from a safe distance, weaving through downtown streets. His dashboard-mounted phone continued recording as Clive pulled into the Velvet Crown Valet. Graham parked across the street and filmed as Clive handed off the briefcase to the doorman like it was a regular Friday night delivery. Then, Clive disappeared inside. He emerged 45 minutes later, hands empty, shoulders relaxed. Smug. Over the weekend, Graham gathered everything: hidden footage, audio clips, transaction records, timeline analysis. It was airtight. This wasn't just circumstantial, this was a case. And on Monday morning, Graham Ellis returned to the Riverside Tavern. Not as Greg Evans, but as the man who built it. He didn't go to his office. Instead, he stood in the center of the dining room as every employee, day shift, night crew, kitchen, bar, gathered around, murmuring in confusion. Clive stood at the front, confident as ever. "Mr. Ellis has called an emergency meeting. Not sure what this is." "Actually, Clive," Graham interrupted, stepping into the light. "I can explain exactly what this is." Clive blinked. Recognition dawned. Then fear. "Greg, what are you?" "I'm not Greg. I'm Graham Ellis." And for the last 3 weeks, I've been working undercover to find out why my staff keeps quitting. Gasps rippled through the room. Graham continued, voice steady but laced with fury. And now I know why. He held up his phone. Clive, would you like to explain where the tips have been going, or should I show them? Clive stammered. Mr. Ellis, please. Explain the employee fund. Explain why Maria couldn't pay her rent. Explain why your briefcase was full of stolen tips heading to the Velvet Crown. He played the footage. Silence. Clive, the briefcase, the handoff, all of it. That's nearly $3,000, Graham said, voice rising. Money you earned. That was your money. Maria stepped forward, tears in her eyes. That would have saved my apartment. Graham looked Clive dead in the eyes. Would you like to tell them how you used their money to buy into a luxury restaurant? The room exploded. Shock, anger, betrayal. Lisa stepped forward, shaking. I've been eating ramen for months while you got rich off my tips. Graham raised a hand. Security will be here in 5 minutes. I've already filed charges for theft, embezzlement, and fraud. Then he pulled out a check. This is $43,000, every penny Clive stole, with interest. It will be divided among current and former staff based on hours worked. The room burst into cheers. But Graham wasn't done. He turned to Clive, who looked like a shell of a man. And one more thing, Graham said, holding up a legal document. Thanks to business law, investments made with stolen funds can be seized. He smiled coldly. As of this morning, I am the new majority owner of the Velvet Crown. Gasps again. Clive slumped. I'll be running it honestly, with fair wages and transparent tip policies. And Clive, Graham's voice dropped an octave. You're banned from both establishments permanently. Your career in this industry is over. As Clive was led away in cuffs, Graham turned to his staff, now united by truth. We're rebuilding this place, together. From today forward, tips belong to the people who earn them. Period. Tears, applause, hugs, vindication, justice wasn't just served, it was earned.